Today we're diving into one of the biggest fears that many of us have, and it's the fear of losing control. I'm going to give you some tips on how you can overcome that and help yourself when you recognize it comes up. Stay tuned.
Do you want to know everything? What your heart won't say, but your soul can sing. From love to loss and the space between, she's got the light to lift the unseen. Hope, healing, and transformation. Do you want to know everything? Do you want to know everything?
Welcome to Hope, Healing, and Transformation. My name's Lisa Williams, and today we are diving in to one of probably the most exhausting forms of fear in our series, our mini-series of the shit that scares us, is losing control. We do not like to lose control. How many of you out there who are listening to this is a self-confessed control freak? Yours truly, right here, right in front of you, is a control freak. In certain aspects, certainly I remember Karen coming into my business and other people coming into my business and said, Lisa, you know, the one thing that you're going to have a hard time with is losing control and that you're going to have to surrender control. And I went, that doesn't bother me. But there are certain times that I have controlling tendencies. Let's just put it that way. It's a very nice way of putting it. Controlling tendency over my life because it keeps me safe. And we live in a world that worships control. We control the schedule, control your body, control your emotions, control your home. We have these smart settings that control when the lights go on, when the door opens, how we're going to see things. We have this element of control, but deep down, most people actually don't want control. They want safety, period. And that's what they're looking for, is control actually is sometimes safety in drag. Let's put it that way. So it is really about looking at what is it that makes me safe. And they want to know that if they can let go of control, that life is still going to hold them, that life is still going to give them the opportunities, or that their loved ones will still be there, or that they'll still have the relationship that they want. So today we're going to dive in and understand why the brain equates control with survival and how the body carries pressure and how we can surrender and become how surrendering can be the most powerful act that there is. And trust me, I'm going to share some personal stories about surrender. So many years ago, I remember I was in a retreat in Thailand, and I've been doing a lot of personal development work for many, many years. And I was in this retreat in Thailand, and they said to me, you're going to go and do this liver cleanse. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And they said, yes, 24 hours in your room, and this liver cleanse, it could be brutal. And I'm like, I don't want to do it. They went, just do it. And I went, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do this liver cleanse. So of course I had all the concoctions, all the lotions, the potions, everything I needed. And I was in my room. I was allowed to go out, of course, but they did say you may not want to. And it was probably one of the hardest things that I did. And in this liver cleanse, I broke. I was in a relationship that I had been in a relationship, should I say, that was the most narcissistic relationship ever. And some of you actually saw me in that relationship. It was not my husband, my first husband. And in that place, in this narcissistic relationship, I was really trying to break ties, which I had done. And at that point, I was in my lowest of lows. I was completely losing control. I was in a strange country. I was diving into a liver cleanse. Liver is all about anger. So I was releasing a huge amount, and there was a lot of anger there. I was also very vulnerable because I was not feeling 100%. I was not feeling tip-top, and I had lost control. And I felt like in this place, and I know you're sitting there thinking, Lisa, why did you do that? Well, why did I? But at that point, I sent a text message to my ex. And I had this epiphany. And of course, that narcissistic pattern stepped up where they became very connected to me, and they felt very, very driven and everything else. And of course, I stepped into that, became a comfort, and that became my safety for 24 hours. And in that 24 hours, I actually agreed to then, when I got back from Thailand, I then agreed to meet up with them. And then I was like, what do I do? And in that moment, I had this instant regret because and my previous podcast, I was talking about connection. I was seeking external validation because I was so scared. I was out of control. I didn't know what was going on. I was in my fears. And so a couple of days later, I mean, you don't even want to know what I've done in my life. But anyway, I then decided to go and do a psilocybin journey. So we went to this place in Thailand, and we did psilocybin, which is AKA magic mushrooms, whatever you want to call it. But there we were. And I sat on the beach and I said, and this was, I want to say maybe 13, 14 years ago. I sat on the beach and I said, give me a sign. Tell me what I need to do, because I am really in this space that I have no idea what to do. Now, I have a tattoo on my right wrist, which kind of looks like a little barcode. It looks like this black ink. And many people have asked me what it was. And this is what came out of that night. I sat with my little journal, my notebook, while everybody else is having this good time. And I sat in deep reflection. And I said, show me what I need to do. Show me a pathway forward. And I've got chills as I talk about this. And it sounds so magic mushroomy and psilocybin-y and journey space, but these clouds formed in the sky. And I took note of what these clouds were, and it was like, oh, what is this? And so I looked at it, and then somebody who I was with actually said, oh, that looks like Sanskrit. And I said, oh, okay. So Sanskrit is a very ancient language and communication. And I went, okay. And it's from India. And I started to look at it and I went, what does this mean? And suddenly I went to, she said, well, why don't you ask the person at the hotel? He's Indian. And he reads Sanskrit or speak and can write it. So I took it back to the hotel when I'd done my journey. And he looked at me and he said, where did this come from? Well, listen, I wasn't even supposed to be doing this journey. So it's not like I could say, oh, I was on magic mushrooms and it came in the sky. I kind of had to just say, it appeared to me. Well, which technically it did. He said, I'm going to tell you what this means, Lisa. And it means surrender to the divine, surrender to God, surrender to spirit, surrender to the divine. And I could not think of anything better that happened in that moment, because it was that time after my liver cleanse, after my whole cleanse, my whole body cleanse, that I realized all I had to do was surrender. And the art of surrendering was very hard. And so that's when I had it tattooed on me, a very interesting way of how it came about. But it was such an incredible experience of being shown that you have to surrender to a higher power than what you know of your mind. And whether you call it God, whether you call it spirit, whether you call it whatever you call it, doesn't matter. Divine, source, whoever. Surrendering in to trusting in the universe is a very big thing. And in this mini-series, I wanted to address the different types of fear and all of the things that we have to go through. And part of this is letting go of control. And when we're not in control, when we fear that chaos And then what we fear is going back into the world where we've completely trusted. It's hard. And I remember going back into the US and dealing with the relationship status that I had. And I realized that I had gotten myself back into a very, very, very controlling relationship, and that I had no freedom. I mean, there was zero freedom. I really felt that I needed to help myself. And so I stepped into that moment and I surrendered and I let go of control. And I also allowed the control to be my best friend. So I realized that I had to control how I got out of it. So, one, I was getting out of a really controlling relationship, narcissistic, like textbook narcissist. And then at that point, I didn't know what to do, because all the love bombing, then the hatred, and then the I'm not worthy, you're not worthy, you don't love me the way that I love you, then all of this backwards and forwards of the narcissistic relationship that I was in. I then had to control and find safety in the letting go. And so there was power in it. Okay, so I want you to know that there's polar opposites. I was completely in fear, and yet when I allowed myself to control how I worked and managed through it, changed everything. So that was when I was allowing myself to. I don't want to read the text message. I would screenshot it, delete it off, and I would go back to the text message when I was in a much better frame of mind. And then slowly I cut that person off. Slowly I deleted them. It happened over a period of time, but I became stronger because I controlled how I dealt with my fear. So you've seen that there's two polar opposites right now. So I could have been in control or controlling how it worked and having control taken from me, and the fear around not being in the relationship or being alone, fear of being alone. And then when I controlled the aspect and the outcome, and I allowed myself to not be in fear of being alone, but I allowed myself to be into a control aspect, I then was able to control my outcome. Like I would control when I looked at those text messages. So therefore, I was not in my fears, I was in my strength. And that is where we have to look at it as polar opposites. But what was happening in my mind in that moment, my amygdala, all right, this tiny little piece of my brain which governs the fear, love, predictability, really flared up, because it doesn't care if the situation that you are in is healthy. It just cares that it's familiar, because you can cope with familiarity. You know the probable outcomes of what is going on, so you know how to deal with it, which is the reason why my relationship was a probable outcome and it was familiar. So that's the reason why people stay in their jobs, their relationships, their habits that drain you. You know, this is the reason why your brain interpreted this known sense as safe rather than the unknown. I've always been brought up in life with change, and I'm a great change person. So one of the things that I love to do and keep change. So if you're one of these people that says, how do I overcome that? One of the things that I am going to share with you that's really helped me is by changing things up in my home constantly. I move my sofa around, I'll move my chairs around, I'll move my office around, because what that does is it keeps change in my brain. It keeps something moving. I'll change the way I go to, my grocery store or Starbucks or the airport or wherever I normally go. I don't often go to Starbucks, but wherever I go, I will change my route going there. I will change the stores that I shop in. I will change the days that I do things, because these little acts of change can actually help us out of this need for routine and the brain needing control, because the brain is wired for safety. When our world around us feels really unpredictable, the nervous system craves something that it can manage. And this is what's happening for everybody. When we are out of control, it finds something it can have control on, which is why you might organize things, you might overthink, you might micromanage. This is actually yourself saying, I need sense of order. And so when I look at, I remember having a friend of mine who labeled everything in my closet. And I will tell you, I still have things absolutely labeled, and I still have little boxes, but there is a familiarity about it where I'm able to look at each box and know what's in there and know that I've got a safety net. But it also helps me manage my life. It helps life easy for me. When I'm running low on things, I know I can stock it up. But I also realized that when she came into my world to organize and create order in my, let's say my bathroom, as it was my bathroom, I realized that there was a fear that she needed to be in control. She's like, how do you cope? And I'm like, I know where everything is. And now I've just trained myself, and it actually has worked for me. But here's the interesting part, and it's kind of this little paradox that goes on. The more control there is, the less flexible your brain becomes. That's tough. The more control you have, the less flexible your brain is. That tells you that you are not able to deal with creativity. The prefrontal cortex of your mind, or of your brain, which handles the creative area, the problem solving, it shuts down when your amygdala is overreactive. So when you are in this constant state of fight or flight, or when you are in so much control, your creativity is dampened. So the harder you try to control, the less capacity you actually have to adapt. Let me repeat that, because I think that's a really important thing. The more control that you have, the less capacity you have to adapt. And your life just suddenly feels smaller. So control is not safety. Having the ability to adapt is. And I think this is where we confuse what is really happening. So, and it springs to mind about people I know who have they have massive control issues. Everything has to be control. And yet the opportunity, the flexibility to adapt to different situations, circumstances, newness is hard. I'll just speak honestly about something that I know, where I've had people in my life who are very, very control, because it's their safety, and there's no shame in it, but it's only because I know their history that I have compassion for it. So their control has become a very, very hard, they are very rigid in that space. Now along comes somebody that says, hey, would you like to do something that's a little outside the box? A little fun, a little outside the box. And suddenly it's shut down, and there's this no. And they have got every reason, every excuse, everything that you can imagine for why they are not going to do this thing that's fun. And they are saying, well, we already do it. We are part of that. This is what it is. I am involved in that. And I'm like, no, you're not. Actually, this could be fun. And there's control. And so now they're trying to validate from everyone around, oh, they're trying to do this. And that's where stories become, because they're creating a story in their prefrontal cortex. They're creating in the neocortex, they're creating the story that then becomes what they're hanging on to because it's their safety. So therefore they're trying to control. Meanwhile, over here, whoever suggested this fun item is going, that is not what I suggested. And that's how things get misinterpreted. And I recognize it because there's no room for creativity. And this is the part where we get really, really struggling. And I actually do say to people, and I remember doing an amazing workshop with a great guy called Dr. Roger Firestein. And in fact, I'm going to try and get him into Prismora, which will be fun. But he talks about creative problem solving. And it's a controlled system which makes you feel controlled, but gives you the flexibility to create. And when you are able to create, and he talks about being able to look, and this is actually where I now teach a very similar process, and it's his idea, force connections, where you can look around the room and you can lay your eyes on, let's say, a light, and all of a sudden that light gives you an inspiration. And it is definitely a process that I work with as a psychic and medium. But in creative problem solving, how many times do you actually look out the window and just allow your brain to wander? Well, that is actually an opportunity that your brain needs to stay creative. You need to have moments of relaxation and creative play because otherwise you stay in that control. But let's also look at how it shows up in the body. As you know, I'm a big advocate for emotions staying in the body, emotions being part of the body. And so let's look at it. Let's talk about the jaw. The jaw is tight. So everyone who has TMJ or anything to do with the jaw, or you're starting to notice that you're clenching the jaw, that's you holding your expression. Your shoulders, if you're having shoulder problems, all right, if you're constantly hunched and your shoulders are stiff and your back is stiff, that's like you're bracing for the impact that's happening. If your breath is shallow and you're not breathing deeply, you're holding it together. And if your core becomes really contracted, it's like you're ready to defend. You are absolutely in that big fear. And I want you to know that there's a way out. You might have tension headaches. I can't tell you how many times I had a tension headache when Chris was in Afghanistan. Digestion issues, fatigue from always being on. Chronic fatigue, let me talk about chronic fatigue and autoimmune. Chronic fatigue and autoimmune, if we look at the emotion behind it, is when you do not feel safe and you need to control. Period. And that is when your vagus nerve is in complete overdrive. It's on high alert for far too long. And what we need to do is we need to relax it. And yet, when you do start to relax, you may feel unsafe. And that's your body saying that it's associated with rest, with being vulnerable. You know, learning to relax is like trying to feel like learning to relax in this place. It's almost as though you're unlearning this moment of danger. You're unlearning a moment of like, and you have to learn what safety is. And I have complete compassion for anybody in this place because it is not easy. Especially if your fears have come from a traumatic situation that have happened many years ago when you were 4 or 5 years old, and that now you're riding on this because it's all you know that's kept you safe. But let's look at where it hits you energetically in the body. So energetically, control, the need for control, hits the root chakra and the solar plexus, which is our energy centers for safety, right in the root, and our willpower, our soul. If we look at solar plexus, it's the light, the solar, it's the sun of us, it's the safety, it's the willpower, it's the it's the son of us. Okay, I'm just going to say that. When these are overreactive and they are too wide, or they're like, "Ugh," or you're trying to control everything, they create rigidity, resistance. You become afraid. You become afraid of receiving. You become afraid of even being sometimes. You're always on guard. And if you're listening to this and saying, wow, this feels like me, there is hope. I'm going to give you some hope in a moment. Okay. But when you surrender, it doesn't mean that you're giving up. It doesn't mean that you're giving up power. What it means is that you're remembering. There's a point within us that we have to remember who we are. We have to remember the earth supports us. We have to remember that life is moving with you, not against you. So you are moving, you're flexible, you're flowing. The word flow is very important. When you release control, you're creating space for, well, we always case space for grace or the sacred pause. You're creating this space for guidance, synchronicity, intuition, creativity, fun, abundance. You're creating that. And I want you to think about, are you controlling your money? You know, there's a point that this need for control is, are you controlling everything, even your money? And therefore, you're actually stopping the flow. I have a great friend of mine, Amy. She's a financial advisor. And she said to me, she wanted to do something. And I said no to it. Okay, I said no to it. Because in my mind, I was like, no, Amy, you don't need to pay me for that. We are friends. She got upset. And she said, Lisa, your no, because I wanted to control. She said, your no has now stopped flow. And I went, huh? And I felt it at the time. When I said no, I felt it. I was like, oh, that just felt icky. And what actually happened when we had a long discussion, she said, I want to do this. It's my way of creating flow financially. She said, my abundance comes because I allow flow to happen. I spend, I let it come in. I spend, I let it come in. I'm like, huh. She said, no, I don't spend frivolously and I don't spend beyond my means, but I spend where I want. And I think, what can I do to get that? And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And at that point, I realized that my saying no to something that she wants to do and that she wants to pay for is me stopping her flow. Because it was my fear, and here's where it becomes tricky. My fear was actually, I do not want her to think I'm using her for that financial gain because of my own fear of poverty or my own fear of am I enough? Am I worthy? And so I stepped into my fear by saying no, and yet it was actually stopping somebody else's creativity and flow. And it was a really interesting thing. So we came to a compromise, and I said to her, I said, the way it was presented, and because it was all via text, another reason why you should always pick up the phone. And we were both very short on time. And when we talked about it, I said, it came across this way. And she said, okay, I got it. And she said, well, yours came across this way. And I said, okay, I got it. And so there was a miscommunication because both of us were busy. Both of us hadn't got time to communicate. And it was just a quick text message. And it was very, very interesting how it came about. And so we found a compromise. And we realized that both of us were in some form of fear. And it was interesting to realize. And so when we released the control, we actually created a space for an intuitive space between us. And we created this moment where I could say, hey, what about this? And she could say, hey, what about that? And we found a common goal. And it returned us into this alignment of something that we wanted, both wanted, that was had a larger plan. So if we think about it, and if I put it into a context here, think of the ocean. All right, the waves are not just they don't resist the tide, okay? They don't. They move with it. And at that point, what flow feels, what it is it's the flow. You can see the rhythm of the earth, okay? You can see the rhythm of the way it works. That's what flow feels like when you're in that flow and you're without resistance. When you're trying to stop, if you're trying to stop the resistance and you're trying to stop the outcomes, or you're trying to force the outcomes, it's not going to work. This is the reason why I'm often saying to you, take a breath, allow yourself to breathe, allow yourself to go outside. So we're going to do a little exercise here. And again, we're going back into our 4 counts, our breathing. We're going to breathe in for 4, we're going to hold for 4, hold for 2, and then breathe out for 6. But what we're going to do is you can place your hands comfortably on your lap with your palms facing up. And you're just going to take a deep breath in. So take a deep breath in and hold, and out through the mouth. Okay, now I want you to place your hands down this time. You're going to breathe in, hold, and breathe out. And I want you to notice the difference between the energy of your palms. So, how did it feel with your palms down? You may want to do it again with your palms down. Breathe in, hold, breathe out. And now turn your palms up. Breathe in and hold and release. Did you notice how when you turned your palms down, you felt a little bit guarded or trapped? And when you turned your palms up, the energy was flowing. Simple example of how energy flows. So I want you to ask yourself here, or even say to yourself, I release control, I receive calm, or I am completely calm, I am trusting, I am safe. These affirmations are really powerful. And if you do this in the morning, and if you do this any time that this tension rises, you're actually going to start teaching your nervous system that being open is safe. Being open is your opportunity to be creative. And also start looking at your journal. You know, what in my life am I holding too tightly onto? Why am I holding onto it so tightly? And then look for all these areas in your life where control has been disguised as love or responsibility, such as being in a narcissistic relationship, controlling how your adult children are, you know. And I want you to ask yourself, if I don't handle everything, is it really going to fall apart? If you don't turn off your phone, is the world going to stop turning? And the answer is no. It really won't. The more surrender you have, or the more awareness, should I say, the more awareness you have, the more you actually can surrender. The more surrendering you can have, the more capacity you have to love and create and be everything in the world. So I want you to understand that these are just some little techniques, and have an awareness about what is really going on in yourself, because it's all about now living the life that you deserve to live. So I'm going to invite you to come over, join me in Prismora. Prismora is a company that Karen Romine and myself have created, which is super, super exciting. We realized over the last several years through our readings that everybody's in fear. And this heightened sense of fear has now started to manifest. And we would like to help you overcome these fears, make better decisions, help yourself financially, help yourself emotionally, help yourself with your families, and make better decisions in order for you to live the best life possible. So get yourself on the priority notification list at prismora.com. We'll put it all in the show notes. And I would love to help you. So therefore, you are now living the most expansive life possible. And in the next episode, we're going to be talking about the algorithms of fear. This is in the whole mini-series of the shit that scares us, okay? Because there is a lot of stuff that scares us. But I'm here to help you through this and navigate the fear. You're not alone. My name's Lisa Williams. You've been listening to Hope, Healing, and Transformation. And I will see you all again next time.
Do you feel a whisper in the back of your mind, like the truth is waiting, but it's hard to find? Well, maybe there's magic in the words she brings. Close your eyes and listen in. Do you want to know everything? What your heart won't say, but your soul can sing. From love to loss and the space between, she's got the light to lift the unseen. Hope, healing, and transformation. Do you want to know everything? Do you want to know everything?
Thank you so much for joining me today. And remember, the information shared on this podcast is meant to inspire and support you, but it's not a replacement for personalized advice from a qualified professional. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who might benefit. And don't forget to tune in next time. Until then, take care and keep believing in something better.